Every day, Maine's Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife's biologists, educators, game wardens, and other staff members report to wild locations spanning Maine's fields, forests, lakes, and labs, in trucks, boats, on snowmobiles, and ATVs. I'm Katie Yates, and in Season 1 of Fishing Game Changers, I'm catching up with our staff to learn what they do, why they love it, and what drives them to apply their time and talent to the Maine outdoors. In this episode, I stopped by the Bangor office to meet up with Danielle, a wildlife biologist who works in the bird group and focuses on understanding statewide populations of colonial wading birds, secretive marsh birds, black terns, loons, and other rare water birds.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'm a wildlife biologist. That's my title with the department, but I work in our bird group, which is in our Bangor office where all our species specialists are. It's our wildlife research and assessment section. And the species that I get to focus on are wetland birds, so anything from great blue herons to loons to black terns to other secretive marsh birds. Basically, our responsibilities as species specialists is to understand statewide populations of all these species that we focus on. A lot of them end up being some of the rare species, so we do a lot of survey and monitoring to know where they are in the state, how well their populations are doing, whether they're still existing in historic places or popping up in new places. And then that all feeds into trying to understand what we can do on the ground to prevent their loss or disappearance from the state. A lot of the surveys that we do is mainly just going out to a site that we know they either are or have historically been and documenting them during, say, the breeding season. Most of these birds are not here in the winter, so we're more concerned about their breeding populations in Maine. So we might go out, for black terns, we'll go out to all the wetlands that are currently occupied as well as some historic ones every season, and go out in a canoe or kayak to most of those sites, to the wetlands where they nest, and try to count how many pairs are at those sites so that we have trend information over time. Other surveys that we do might involve our secretive marsh bird surveys are interesting because we go out usually by kayak, but sometimes just walking to wetlands, and we actually play the calls of the birds and then listen for them to call back because they're really secretive and you rarely ever hear them, but they often will respond to the calls of their species. So that's how we can detect their presence, and then depending on how many individuals we're hearing, we can detect their abundance as well. It is really fun. Like the neat thing about those surveys is you have to be out at the wetland a half hour before sunrise. So sometimes that means waking up, in the dead of the night to get to wherever you're going. But once you're out there, it's just a really neat time of day to be out on the landscape, and it's not necessarily quiet because a lot of times there's a ton of bird song, so that's kind of cool. But there's that peacefulness of it, even with all the sounds of nature with you.
Danielle, like the birds she studies, is quiet. I picture her silently watching for these secretive marsh birds on a hazy morning, the wetlands around her electric with sounds as she waits with skilled stillness.
So I always appreciate those times when I get to do those surveys. And then you're pretty much done with work by 10 a.m. So by the time, and then you have to drive back to wherever you started from. So, but yeah, those are interesting surveys. And, we don't always get results in the sense of the birds don't always respond and they're not always in the wetlands that you survey, but, you get to see other things. You might see, otters swimming along the stream or beavers or other critters, whether it's deer, interesting birds. So all the data that we, especially with our rare species, all that data feeds into databases that also feed into some, like our environmental review process, where we map where these species occur on the landscape so that we when there's something that's going to happen on the landscape nearby, it'll trigger our review. And so we can have input into that environmental review process and say, recommend ways to minimize any impacts to the birds or whatever species it is that's at that location. So it's really important data because it helps us make sure that we're protecting all the species, on the landscape and their habitats.
Since 2009, Danielle has spent a majority of her time researching why great blue herons have undergone a decline along Maine's coast. Danielle works with students and volunteers of all ages to capture, tag, and track great blue herons.
Volunteers, we have a volunteer network called the Heron Observation Network, and those volunteers actually adopt great blue heron colonies, and that's one way that we can cover almost the whole state every year and get data for all the colonies that we know about across the state. And that data feeds into our understanding of how the population's doing. So we've learned to include others in our data collection for which helps us actually meet our goals. In recent years we've had the really cool experience of being able to trap and tag herons, great blue herons, and so that's been a really exciting addition to my work program because, the whole thing from start to finish, working with volunteers and students in the field leading up to when we're ready to trap and tag these birds, to the actual morning of when we go out before sunrise and set our traps and wait for a bird to come in, and then finally one does, and we end up being able to handle it, to measure it, to tag it, and then let it go and learn from it. So that's probably one of the most exhilarating parts of my job, is just that kind of work. So
yeah, just the anticipation.
So the anticipation of, are we going to get a bird or not? Because there's definitely been days that we don't. So that it can sometimes be a lot of hours out, at really early mornings, long days kind of thing. But then once you do end up trapping a bird and capturing one, and it's extremely exciting to have something that close up and in your hand. And it's just mind-boggling to be able to see them close up and realize that we're going to learn a lot from this bird that's in our hand right here.
Yeah. So. After capturing these herons, they're fitted with GPS transmitters. GPS stands for Global Positioning System. These transmitters tell Danielle where the birds are in the world and what they're up to.
It's considered a GPS transmitter. They're solar powered, so there's a solar panel on the back that recharges, so they're supposed to last multiple years. And those transmitters get put on kind of like a backpack. And once the bird is released, it's collecting data. As long as the battery is fully charged, it can collect a GPS location every 5 minutes. And so we get some really fine level detail of where the bird is moving around and habitats it's using. And then we also get accelerometer data, which is kind of like the equivalent of having a Fitbit on the bird, so what their activity level is. And you can look at that data and see the bird was flying or it was stationary. So not only do you see where they are, but you can tell what they were doing to some degree when they were there.
Many hours of baiting, checking trail cameras, setting traps, planning and preparation go into capturing the blue herons for this research. After the birds are measured and fitted with their little GPS backpacks, they're safely released, and Danielle monitors their movements.
Well, so, with this project, we chose to work with schools. We had the students coming out in the field with us anywhere between, I'd say middle school and high school was primarily the age. We actually did work with a group in Harpswell that was a little younger, maybe 4th, 5th graders. But most of them were middle school and high school, and then some college students. We had them out in the field with us, putting out bait fish in our bait bins for the herons, and even some of them got to come out with us on the day that we trapped the bird and got to see the bird close up. This past year when we had tagged that great blue heron in Harpswell. The students that we worked with named it Harper. And so
Harper is an adult female great blue heron who was captured and tagged with a GPS transmitter in Harpswell, Maine by MDIFW biologists with the help of students and volunteers. Harper surprised Danielle for a few reasons.
So far, the first surprise was that when we banded it and tagged it with a GPS transmitter, it was late May. And we usually think of most of our great blue herons as being breeders at that time in the season. They're either, they're already set up. They probably have nestlings in their colonies, and that any adults that even aren't breeding are still here, just roaming around, floating around. But 10 days after that bird, after we tagged that bird, it just took off for northern New Brunswick. And so we just didn't expect a movement at that time of year from a bird that we would have thought was just like kind of here to stay for at least the spring, summer season. So that was interesting. And, just something I never expected. And that's the thing that's kind of neat about that work, is that when you think you know something, you realize how much you don't know. And individuals and the birds and populations, you get surprised all the time, and that's kind of the neat thing about our job is we don't know everything, and so we're always learning. And then that same bird, when fall came to time to migrate, it wowed us again by taking off and flying nonstop for 38 hours over the open ocean to Florida. And
what?
Yeah, so, and we've had birds do pretty long flights before. Out of our tag birds, we had one go maybe 20 hours nonstop. So this was a lot longer. And it was over open ocean the whole time, except it did fly over the Outer Banks of North Carolina, but it didn't stop. So that was really interesting to see that, and in a short amount of time too. So we're just, constantly learning from the birds that we're studying.
So you get to know those birds really, really well.
Yeah,
do you feel kind of an attachment to them?
Yeah, it's hard not to. We monitor their activity so that if when they do die or something happens to them, we can find out what it is and retrieve them and learn from anything that's happened. So we do follow them pretty closely, and we always hope that what we're doing with these tags is not affecting them too, so we want to monitor them closely so that we're not influencing their behavior as well. But yeah, it's hard not to get attached, because then once you start following an individual bird, you see where they're nesting, where they like to feed, and then it's exciting when they migrate because they're going all this far distance, and imagining this individual bird flying that far. And then some of our birds, we've seen them go to Florida for the winter, the Bahamas, to Cuba, and to Haiti. So just imagining a bird that's in Maine in the spring is all the way down in Haiti for the whole winter. It's just really interesting to think of it on an individual level.
Yeah. One of the herons tagged as part of this project is named Nokomis, named by student helpers from Nokomis Regional High School. Nokomis is another remarkable female heron that makes an incredible journey to winter in Haiti.
And then it starts to translate to the population level too. You think, well, how many of our birds are going to Haiti? How many are going to the Bahamas? Do they go other places? And what are the things that they might be facing in those locations? We've made some contact. A teacher in Haiti had seen one of our news articles about Nokomis, is the name of the bird that winters in Haiti. And she wrote a poem about the bird, and I contacted her because she shared it to our Facebook page. And we've conversed on email, and she's really interested in getting her students into birding, and which isn't something that's a common pastime down there. So it's been really cool to have this little relationship across so many miles. That's all because of this bird, So that's been really fun.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
It's really fun. I mean, it's amazing how this project in particular has connected me to a lot of people. Not just the woman in Haiti, but all these the students that we work with, the teachers, the volunteers. There's just so many people that we've interacted with and who are learning alongside me. So it's a really fun relationship to have with them too.
Danielle didn't always want to study birds. In fact, growing up, she was more interested in marine biology. But like others in our department, seasonal work brought her to some unexpected places.
How long have you been doing this?
My job, my position here. So I've been here, I think it's going to be 13 years this year. Yeah, 13 years in February. So
Wow, a long time.
yeah, it's kind of ticked away quicker than I thought it would. It doesn't feel like I've been that
Definitely.
long. It's been a great experience so far, and I don't see myself going anywhere. I actually grew up in a state park, so like I'm not really from a town.
I grew up in a state park.
Yeah, my dad was the manager of 2 golf courses at a state park in New York, called Rockland Lake, and so we lived in a state park housing and that kind of thing. So I grew up, pretty much with nature all around me. We didn't have any neighbors or anything.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so sometimes I think, well, maybe that's how I ended up where I am, just having that exposure as a kid.
Were you always interested in birds?
So I started out when I was, graduating high school and looking at colleges. I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. Everybody said, well, if you want to do that, you'll need your master's anyway. So go get a undergrad degree, a bachelor's degree in biology, and then go on for your master's. So to save money, I went to a state school in New York. While I was there, just got presented a lot of opportunities to work, not only with birds, but just with other wildlife, doing internships and stuff. And so my path kind of veered away from marine biology. There's not a lot of marine biology in Western New York. So just little things kind of steered me more towards wildlife, sometimes towards birds, but really my interest was pretty broad at that point. I knew I wanted to do something in the wildlife field. And so when it came time to look at graduate schools, and because everybody said you need a master's at least, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I was willing to do anything, really. But I got offered a teaching assistantship that was working with Chihuahuan ravens in New Mexico,
Cool.
which is a bird I hadn't even heard of, but turned out to be a great experience. And then that kind of, still kind of steered me a little more towards birds. And I started working for National Wildlife Refuges, doing a wide array of different species, mostly land management, habitat management. So then, my interest over time kind of, over time I became more interested in bird life and birding and working more directly with birds. Opportunities present themselves. You take advantage of them. You meet different people. You find out what you like along the way, what interests you more. And an opening came up in the habitat group with our department, and I had GIS skills that transferred well to that position. And then whenever there was a field job open, like this one, I kind of jumped on it. So get back into the field.
Yeah, because that's the part you liked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard not to have that aspect of it. That's kind of why I got into it, was the love for being outside and observing the wildlife around us. So there is a lot of work that goes into that, a lot of planning, and unfortunately lots of emails and just correspondence. Not that I don't like to talk to people or email them, but a lot of times that stuff takes up so much time that you feel like you can't get out in the field as much as you want to. So there's a little bit of, the give and take, right? So you get to go out in the field, but then you kind of pay for it. You got phone messages or emails you got to answer, and so.
It's no surprise that Danielle enjoys the outdoors. She tries to balance her personal love for the outdoors with work, but it doesn't stop her from observing birds on her day off and contributing to the Maine Bird Atlas. The Maine Bird Atlas is a statewide citizen science project. To contribute, You don't need any birding experience. All you need is a desire to get outside and make some observations.
And what do you like to do when you're not working?
I like to be outside. I don't get outside as much as I'd want to. I have a family. I have 2 kids, 2 girls, and they like to be outdoors to an extent. But there's lots of competing interests and extracurricular activities on their end. But if I was given a choice on a given day, I would love to be out either kayaking or hiking somewhere. Wilderness is obviously kind of what I would envision, a very wild area that you're not going to run into many people and just be out there with whatever critters or sounds and, the elements that you're faced with. So I love to kayak. I like to go hiking. I don't do enough of it in my free time, but thankfully I do get to do some of it for work. So, we live right near a small pond, and it's easy to get out there. But I'll often invite a friend too, try to get my kids to come with me sometimes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they're not so willing. But I also am pretty involved in our community. It's a struggle, life is so busy, and so I do find that I don't get out as much as I'd like to. I like to run, I'm a runner, and so I love running outside, and that's usually a daily thing for me. It's a favorite part of my day. My road goes right by the pond, so I do get to check on the loons on the pond or whatever new species are coming in and spring migration. Got to write it all down and get it into eBird. And
do you want to just elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the Bird Atlas is another citizen science project where we've got hopefully thousands of volunteers contributing, primarily through observing birds and reporting them on eBird. And then through that process, if it's during the spring months, that's where we're trying to document not only just birds in Maine, but really focusing on breeding birds and then also wintering birds. So during the breeding season, we have, for each species, there's what we call safe dates. And so if you see a bird within those dates, that means it's a potential breeder. And then you can key in on some of their activities. Is it carrying nest material? Is it seen near a nest? Is it carrying food? So all that information that birders are contributing across the state is going to update what we know about all bird species in Maine. So it's a huge undertaking. The last time we did it was late 70s, early 80s. And so it's been a long time since we've updated our knowledge of all the species of birds in the state. Really, anybody can contribute. Anybody who can identify any bird can contribute, even if it's just a robin. So
I don't think a lot of people, when they think of the department, think of somebody managing and observing non-game species.
Yeah, so non-game is a huge part of what we do. I mean, we are mandated to protect and conserve all wildlife species. And that includes, the rarest of the rare and the most common. But it's the rare ones that we do spend a lot of time on, just trying to understand, locations where they are, what kind of habitats they're using, what kind of limiting factors there might be. Are there certain predators that are a problem? Are there invasive plant species that are a problem? Is there human disturbance that's a problem? So we're constantly trying to understand, what's influencing these species on the landscape and how can we make it better for them? How can we improve conditions for that species?
Why do you think that you're passionate about it, about the work that you do?
I feel like we're pretty fortunate to have the diversity that we do have, and it would just be such a shame for any species or even a portion of a population to disappear or decline or anything like that because of humans. I feel like things are such a delicate balance, and that people have this ability to really upset the balance and really influence things in really negative ways. And so I think, part of why I got into the field is, maybe I can change, affect change, or at least prevent some of the bad from happening, and so being a part of research that might lead to something that could help a species or the habitat that they're using is pretty important to me.
To learn more about Danielle's work and how you can get involved as a citizen scientist, visit mefishwildlife.com/changers. Next week, I join a wildlife biologist as she collects biological samples from a deer during hunting season.